Thanks so much for letting me just share a bit of this passion that I have. It's a really long-standing one. You might know, I think most of you kind of might know that I'm a long-term vegan as well as an environmentalist, and I see them as very much converging. And I'm also someone who, like all of us in the room, is attuned to the meta crisis and collapse aware, sort of seeker of solutions. So that's just one little bit of context for why I got quite excited when the plant-based treaty was launched, and just want to share a few slides and a bit of information about that. To make it more interactive and sort of fun, we might start with a quiz. Just curious to see, like, I think most of us are going to probably be pretty well aware, but if you see these three sectors, aviation, waste, and direct emissions from livestock and manure, how would you rank them? Like, which one do you think emits the most on a global scale?
20 times.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so actually, this is just looking at the direct emissions, and it's only 6% from, this is, I mean, the figures vary actually quite a lot, but this is from our world in data. But what we need to remember is that there's also a vast array of other emissions associated with the livestock sector. So this doesn't include the land use change and the livestock feed, you know, the feed that is crops that are grown as feed for farmed animals. So yeah, it's just one of those ones that helps a little bit of perspective. So yeah, this Our World in Data graphic actually is from a major study by Poor and Nemechek, and their figure, I think, ultimately comes out at around 15%. It's fairly on the lower end, but that's, yeah, as I said, there is quite a range and quite a number of different ways that you can count it. Yeah, so what percentage of agricultural land do we think is used for meat and dairy production? That's another quiz question.
Probably the 80, because a lot of the land is used to grow food to feed the cattle.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll come back into a little bit of a graphic on that in a sec. And what about how many, you know, considering the 80% that's dedicated to raising animals, what percentage of our calories do we think meat and dairy provide globally?
I'm thinking, seeing it's always the bottom 100.
Yeah, there we go. It is 18%, and the 37% is how much of our protein it provides, so globally. And this is a really cool graphic from one of the UNEP reports, and it shows at the top, it's about 50%, again, depending how you measure things, but of habitable land is dedicated to agriculture. And then we go over to the right, that will be the urban area, which is all built up land, including settlements and infrastructure, and that's only 1%. So this is where Monbiot in Regenesis talks about agricultural sprawl being the main thing. Like, urban sprawl is a problem, and urban areas are often built on very productive land, and, you know, we shouldn't be sprawling there by any stretch, but it does put it into perspective. This sort of carries on down. This one uses slightly different figures. It's got 77% dedicated to livestock, 23% dedicated to crops for humans. And yeah, then we see like the animal foods providing 18% of calories and 37% of protein. So that's sort of right down the bottom of that graphic. Whereas from plant-based food, we're getting 82% of our calories and 63% of our protein. So yeah, this is like FAO data, Food and Agriculture Organization. And yeah, if you go to Our World in Data, they've got a lot of this as well. So, and then one of the same studies, Poor and Nemechek, looked at how much land could we spare by going globally to a fully plant-based or vegan diet. And this is without needing new innovations. This is a nourishing diet on existing, you know, like plant foods. We don't need precision fermentation or any other innovations just yet, although they would help even more. So. Yeah. I'm not trying to make it too complicated. Yeah, and this is Our World in Data showing those figures. Again, it's just another way of dividing it up. So, you know, showing like cropland and pasture use for grazing, for livestock, and yeah, assuming this is based on reference diets that meet our calorie, protein, and nutritional needs. And yeah, so that's 75% of current agricultural land, and that's an area the size of North America plus Brazil. And then finally, I think this one is, I just feel is always so important because we think about population and how much land humans demand. What percentage of the world's mammals by weight are wild is really the quick question here. Anyone? 4. Yeah. Yeah. So this, some people might have seen this covered in The Guardian. So what it does show humans, yeah. So by weight, 36% of mammals are humans, 60% are livestock, and 4% are wild animals. And then when it comes to birds, 70% of the world's birds by weight are poultry. So yeah, I just thought it'd be fun to do a bit of interactive kind of background there. But yeah, this brings us to this plant-based treaty campaign. So I think given the shocking sort of stats that we just talked about, it's quite surprising that we don't hear more about shifting diets as one of the crucial solutions to the climate and ecological crisis that we face. And that's really where the plant-based treaty came from. And it was launched in 2021 at COP26 in Glasgow. The vision is a global plant-based treaty attached to the UNFCCC Paris Agreement that would facilitate a shift towards a plant-based food system. And at the same time, it's not just pushing for this global agreement that would name and act on the problem, it's also facilitating shifts at the institutional level at every level. So especially cities, that's kind of the main campaign. So I'll come back to that in a sec. And yeah, the ultimate, goal there is to promote the shift towards a just plant-based food system that would enable us to live safely within our planetary boundaries and reforest the earth. So that's what it is. And just to go back like a little bit, it's modelled on the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which has been around a little bit longer. So the same people who originated the plant-based treaty are actually closely aligned with the Fossil Fuel Treaty people. So I don't know, has anyone heard of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty before? Yeah, okay, so it really was the same kind of idea. It's like we need to we need a just transition away from fossil fuels in order to meet our Paris targets. And if we don't do that, they sort of become meaningless. Like we need to both name and then act on problem. And so it was a sort of out of frustration of about the number of climate conferences that there had been without taking action on the great, this massive cause of the problem. And it's saying we need to redirect subsidies to, shift to renewables. We need to ultimately relinquish fossil fuels as quickly as possible, not leave them in the ground. And then we need to restore the damage done. And the plant-based treaty is effectively the same kind of thing, although it's broader than climate, as we all know. But I guess so is fossil fuels in some ways, but yeah, we need to shift away from animal agriculture, as especially in the richest countries where we're over-consuming to an enormous degree. We need to redirect subsidies to support that transition, make it a just transition, and we need to restore the damage done through rewilding and so on. So unfortunately, despite all these conventions and the different agreements we've had and things like the Global Methane Pledge, which was quite promising, nothing's really being concretely done about it. So this is like, okay, we need a campaign to put food systems on the climate agenda, basically. And and that sort of brings us to the point that it's not only climate that will benefit. This is work from Johan Rockström and the Planetary Boundaries people. Has everyone heard about Planetary Boundaries, that framework? Has anybody not heard about it? Yeah, so I suppose they are, my understanding is, these are Earth systems that support, they support life. And if they're breached, I think even breaching any single one of them would be, destabilizing, potentially undermining the conditions for a habitable planet. Things like biosphere integrity, the climate change, that system, the land use. There's the biogeochemical flows, which is things like the like phosphorus and nitrate pollution. There's freshwater change, ocean acidification. There is aerosol loading and stratospheric ozone depletion and novel entities like PFAS, plastics, other toxins that last indefinitely. That's a general sort of framework. But when they look at the analysis of what's driving the overshoot, and 6 out of 9 are in the red zone, they've overshot already, and a 7th is on the brink as of the last update, which was about a year ago, which is the ocean one, ocean acidification. And they're very clear, the scientists behind it, that the way we produce food is the single largest reason that we've transgressed planetary boundaries. It is uncontroversially the leading driver of biodiversity loss and driving the extinction crisis. But it's also, it's covering freshwater, pollinators, soil health, rainfall generation, quality of air and water. So that's the stark picture that we're talking about. And then I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about the principles of the Plant-Based Treaty and how it sort of looks, what the actual aims are. Yeah, I should say the approach to getting a treaty it's not just precedented by the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. That itself was based on previous treaty campaigns that have begun in a grassroots way. That's what it's about. So it's basically, it's a grassroots pressure campaign for a global treaty. But as I also mentioned, there is, in addition to the bottom-up pressure, we have, it's kind of like, well, a bit like what I think it was, Timotheus, maybe both of you had this kind of think local. Think global, act local kind of idea. So that's the kind of think global idea. But then there's the act local idea, which is working with promoting institutional change. So that's things like working with cities, schools, hospitals, and universities to promote plant-based menus or defaults. So like a plant-based default would mean, instead of having the default assumption being that we eat animal-based foods, that we switch it around and we have the default being plant-based. So we're not taking choice away, but we are just changing that norm and providing a nudge and normalizing plant-based options. And that's just one of many ways. I already mentioned the sort of 3 aspects of it. So there's the redirect, relinquish, and restore. So redirect is supporting the transition to a plant-based food system using policy tools and public information campaigns. And this is, again, like we're all kind of converging on the idea of local, city-based action. And that can be, as I say, cities. I think cities are a really important one because that's where most consumption happens and it's driving the crisis. But it can also be rural areas as well. They can all take action locally through different methods that suit their jurisdiction and their communities. But it would be things like promoting plant-based foods through public awareness campaigns, implementing plant-based meals in city institutions like internal and external council events and meetings and libraries. Cities can establish greater access to community gardens to encourage residents to grow food, as that converges with what you were saying, and encouraging cost-effective and healthy plant-based foods in things like food banks. And a really important aspect is that they can commission reports into cities' consumption-based emissions to help people become aware of that the food they eat is actually their biggest way to not only reduce their carbon footprint, but water use and a multitude of other planetary boundaries. So I guess one thing that I really wanted to show you guys was this isn't widely done at the moment, but there was a really interesting study done in Melbourne a few years ago, and that showed some pretty stunning results about how much of it was like a food print study, and it looked at greenhouse gas emissions, water use, and land use. And I might show you that in a moment. Actually, I've got some graphics, but it was animal agriculture really absolutely dominates, and so that's pretty fascinating. It's not. I think if more cities were doing this type of study and then acting on it, taking that bold leadership through really helpful, it's not like, it's very constructive, solutions focused, trying to just make access easier and encourage awareness, so it's a kind of win-win, you know, drawing attention to the other benefits of eating more plant-based for health as well, so personal and public health. So anyway, that's just what the redirect one looks like. The next one is, the relinquish. And this really just means, you know, ultimately it's a bit like leaving fossil fuels in the ground. You know, we need to stop making the problem worse by continuing to you know, encroach into wild areas for animal agriculture, you know, new farms, new slaughterhouses, intensification of existing farms, you know, conversion for animal feed production, clearing of forests for grazing, fish farms, expansion of aquaculture, large-scale fishing vessels. That's really what we need to see. Otherwise, the problem will just continue to be perpetuated. And then we have restore, and this is about healing the damage done. And you know, we can actually, you know, a lot of it is possible. I mean, my understanding is that rewilding is often best left to nature. You know, we don't have to do all that much, but there are lots of ways that we can sort of steward this process. And yeah, freeing that land for rewilding and reforestation, but also we can have a stronger focus on ecosystems, even at the sort of city level, by having more urban green spaces, trees, wildflowers, green rooftops and wildlife corridors, those kinds of things. And they're all sort of recommended in the plant-based treaties proposals. Yeah, and then just getting on to what the campaign actually entails. There's collecting endorsements, which is, you know, from anybody and everyone who thinks that this is the right direction. And obviously the more they get, you know, celebrity endorsements and IPCC scientists and so on, the more that lends a higher profile. And obviously cities, as I mentioned, if cities endorse, then they really are sort of showing that leadership and forging a path and being quite innovative and agile and adapting to what their communities need and want. So then, and I might just quickly show you where we're at as of today in terms of endorsements. So 38 cities have endorsed. Most recently, we had France, Grenoble in France was actually the first French city to endorse. This many, over 200,000 individual endorsers, you know, 1,600 organizations and 2,300 businesses. That's that one. And then there's urging citywide plant-based food strategies, which is the city program, as I've mentioned, with Grenoble as the most recent new signatory. And, you know, it can be a council just endorses it, and because out of effectively like acknowledging that this is a problem and that we should be raising awareness. And, you know, part of it is just sort of then potentially, once they've endorsed, they can use their platforms just to kind of mention this and spread the word a little bit. But there's actually a lot more that they can do. And many, depending on their level of ambition and their jurisdiction, which varies from country to country, even state to state to some extent, sometimes, they can incorporate food-based strategies in their current sustainability action plans. And yeah, they really do have a key role in making plant-based food more accessible and promoting awareness about its benefits. And then there's the menu change in public education. So this can be at a city level, but they're not the only institutions, of course. And so we have the opportunity to improve plant-based menus or expand or make defaults available in places like early childhood education, universities, senior homes, and care homes and things like that. And there's actually a set of playbooks on the Plant-Based Treaty website that look at how institutions can implement best practices. And they're always trying to, you know, there's great innovation happening, and this is a way to kind of seed that innovation and share best practice, make it easier to implement around the world. So again, this is what I like about the campaign, is how solutions focused it is. And then there's the advocacy at global climate talks, and I know most of us in this room would share Greta's skepticism about the, you know, efficacy of these talks, but nonetheless, while they happen, we don't want food systems to be sidelined, or what's happened more recently is food systems get a mention, but diet change does not. We get greenwashing of things like, you know, these claims that, oh, you know, the agricultural sector is a net sink because grazing ruminants apparently sequesters carbon in the soil, which is not scientific. And so we need to be there to debunk these myths and to share facts and to also unite with countries that are leading the way. And it's often the countries that have done the least. And so my understanding is that at the last COP, for example, last year, they met a lot of people from countries that are suffering the worst from climate change, have contributed the least to it, and whose diets don't really need to, their diets don't need to change as it stands, but they are being targeted by the expansion of the global standard farm into their countries, and the global standard diet, which is a meatification process, and they're trying to resist it. So that's the kind of thing that happens at those global climate talks. And then finally is training and capacity building, which is basically they are a sort of white label campaign. So this has all just been done on an absolute, as far as I know, like on a real shoestring. It's all about people power and community action, and allowing people, people like me, to advocate for systemic change. So they have like a lot of tools on the website, campaign materials and graphics and things like that, and anyone can get involved. And the idea is it just takes any one local leader to emerge. We can go and do outreach, like at O Weeks, for example. We can partner with restaurants. There's a new campaign called 100 Cafes, which is all about helping the food service industry, so cafes and restaurants, basically, to improve their plant-based offering and to use best practice about how they advertise their plant-based options, for example, and just providing them with resources and recipes and so on. So anyway, that's the kind of side of things that we're talking about when we say training and capacity building. This is Edinburgh's endorsement, an example of an endorsing council that has, I think, it really led the way. They endorsed in 2023, and then they did a city-wide consumption footprint assessment focused just on climate, consumption-based climate impacts from their residents, and they found that food was substantial. I think it was 23% was food, and more than half was from meat and dairy. And so they are doing, they've created an action plan, much of which they were already doing, but then they've expanded certain programs and, started partnering to do eco-labeling on food, on meals and dishes and stuff in public institutions like universities and the local conference centre. They're engaging with local businesses to adopt more plant-based options and to endorse. And they're advocating to like sister cities, the Scottish government, national leaders to promote and endorse a plant-based treaty. So this is kind of how it works in action as a bottom-up campaign. So they're just a great example. And this was the Melbourne's food print study that I mentioned before. This is the greenhouse gas emissions from food by food group, and I've put the dotted line around to show the animal-based component of that. So I believe that is, I added it up. I did the calculation, so I'll tell you how much it was. So when I added that up, it was 84.2% was due to animal product consumption of the greenhouse gases. This is the land footprint. It's even higher, as you can see. That was 95.4% of the land footprint. And this was actually based on the typical Australian diet, and they use that as a proxy for Melbourne's diet. And then the proportion of water to feed Melbourne by food group. And again, we're talking about, animal ag dominating to a substantial extent there. So the best way to find out more is on the website. There's an email action to email your city, your councillors, and that is a little bit tricky for those of us in Brisbane because we have a really large council that is not very sympathetic to this. But if you think about places like in Melbourne where they have lots and lots of different councils and a lot more openness, and in fact some really good practice already happening, and Darebin City Council has endorsed, and we're trying to support them to implement their endorsement and to hang on to it and to continue being bold leaders, even with the sort of culture wars that mean that sometimes people are a little reticent. But yeah, that's where you can go anyway to sort of start exploring more. These are the existing parliamentarians who've endorsed, both current and previous reps and lots of counsellors as well. They are, I think actually the website is a bit out of date, but that's going to be updated. And then we have quotes from various counsellors, this is where you get kind of a little bit of hope, where somebody like, a local counsellor in Monash has said, we can't continue to leave the food, dietary question off the table. We do need to grapple with this. And this is where you can endorse, but it's really just plantbasedtreaty.org/endorse. And you can endorse as an individual, or if you represent, and yeah, there's categories once you enter your email. If you're a scientist, if you're, I guess, I don't know, I can't remember the other categories. It will give you lots of categories when you go to endorse as an individual. But there's also, you can endorse as a business as well, or as an organization. So if you do represent an organization, you can endorse, and then you automatically get a sort of comms pack with the logo, and you can put that in your email, in your website footer, your email footer, that kind of thing. There's a scientist's open letter, which is still very current. It's from a couple of years ago, but it's got some really good information in it. So there's the Plant-Based Treaty Global, has a very active presence online, all the social channels. You can also find the Aussie and Australia and New Zealand channels, which are a lot more grassrootsy, as you would expect for this kind of campaign. So you can check those both out and follow along. I just wanted to mention some recommended resources, and this is probably the main one. This is that book I always go on about, The Climate Crisis and Other Animals by Dr. Richard Twine. I really recommend it. If you don't want to read it, I recommend listening to an interview with him he's on Hope for the Animals podcast. And then Regenesis, we're always talking about Regenesis, PA. I just feel like he's a really important voice in this. So I just wanted to close with that. Thanks so much.
Yeah.